Good morning, everyone, and good evening for those who are joining us in East Africa. My name is Ashadhu Ingram Ssenkubuge, Secretary of the Churchill Institution and Director, Winston Center for Heritage, Culture and Museum Studies at the Mutessa Monroe University, Kampala, Uganda. I'm very much pleased to be the first to speak on this kind of engagement because it is a big event for us here. Looking in the participation, of course, we are very much praised. Let me share with you that we have put a lot of passion in shaping an engagement that would put us closer to the international Churchill community for our 4 years of establishment. I'll keep it short to say how much you are welcome, how much passion you have put in the program, and how much we wish that you enjoy these 2 days with us. We are proud that the program has been a way to attract your interest and participation, so we all trust it will be successful. The Global Churchill Leaders Roundtable discussion series was aimed from the beginning to bring leaders together to discuss issues such as leadership, education, climate change, and other crucial social issues in our world today. This transformative project was inspired by America's National Churchill Museum's mission and the Churchill Institution's vision. The Churchill Institution's vision, shaping the future by preserving our heritage, discovering new knowledge, and sharing our resources with the world. America's National Churchill Museum's mission, to commemorating and celebrating the lifetimes and distinguished career of Sir Winston Churchill and inspiring current and future leaders by his example of resilience, determination, and resolution. Within a short time, in research on the topics, it was evident that the scope of the content wanted an expanded program of professional speakers, as well as an opportunity for the attendees to join in conversations on leadership, climate actions, museums and collection, and other topics. We are deeply grateful to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and knowledge with us. The underlying concept for the roundtable discussion format was based on content-driven approach to enhancing leadership through interactive conversations. This concept is vital since it encourages continuous dialogues in a research, networking, and collaboration, as well as providing a forum to discuss issues on leadership, science, technology, global security, and many others. To commence this program today, of course, we have partners and co-hosts at the America's National Churchill Museum at Westminster College, Missouri, that I would like to thank warmly because they have really supported this project from the beginning. Before I introduce our distinguished speakers for today, I'd like to use my capacity as a leader and a proud Churchillian to quote words of Sir Winston Churchill about living with purpose. He once said, "What is the use of living if it be not to strive for noble causes and make this murdered world a better place for those who will live in it after we are gone?" We all understand that the lasting climate solutions must center perspectives of communities on the front lines of climate impacts, who are already grappling with a range of environmental challenges. I wish that all of our institutions, organizations, and societies must find their voices on climate change. Of course, I'd like to express our deep gratitude to leaders who shared their sustainable perspectives with us yesterday, and leaders from the worldwide Churchill organizations and other like-minded institutions and individuals to discuss the most pressing sustainability challenges in our world. I have the pleasure of introducing speakers this evening, or this morning and this afternoon. As you may know, Churchill College at Cambridge University arose out of the science of World War II and driven in part by Sir Winston Churchill's interest in technology and his fear that his country might be falling behind others during the Cold War period. Churchill Society of Edmonton was established during that same time. One of its early presidents, Harvey, visited the college at Cambridge, and he was very much inspired. When he went back to Canada, he created Churchill scholarship programs enabling Alberta students to study at the Churchill College. Here today we are blessed to have Mrs. Elisebeth Checkel, President of the Churchill Society of Edmonton. Her husband, Dr. David Checkel, was the first scholar to study at the Churchill College. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mrs. Elisebeth Checkel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ashadhu.
Good to have.
Is it time? All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to join you this evening or this morning, wherever you are in the world, at the Global Churchill Leaders Roundtable. My congratulations to the Churchill Institution of Uganda, and thank you to America's National Churchill Museum, and especially to Secretary Ashadhu, to Tim, to Tyler, and to the heroic Susie for organizing this prestigious event. As you know, Winston Churchill visited Uganda in 1907, and he described your country like this: for magnificence, for variety of form and color, for profusion of brilliant life, bird, insect, reptile, beast, for vast scale, Uganda is truly the pearl of Africa. He wrote a book about his trip, and he expressed excitement about the beauty and riches he saw in your country, saying, "Concentrate on Uganda." I've never been to Uganda, and I do look forward to the privilege of visiting you in person one day. I wanted to find a photo of Sir Winston in Uganda, but the photos from that era all show him with a rifle in his hand and quite often with some lovely dead big animal at his feet. Churchill's first visit to Canada was on a speaking tour in 1900 after he made his daring escape from a South African prison and the Boer War was still grinding along. At that time, he called Canada the Great Dominion. He didn't venture west to my part of the country until 1929, when he embarked on a month-long journey. He stopped in many places, and he was also impressed by the beauty and economic potential of my home province, Alberta. Now, I want to show you some photos here. There they are. I don't have a photo of his historic first visit to Banff and Lake Louise, though he loved them and painted both. However, he retained his love of the great animals of both our nations, and he remarked in a letter to Clementine, his wife, "We were motoring along when suddenly, at a turn in the road, bears were seen approaching at no great distance. We stopped the motor alongside of them. The she-bear reared up on her hind legs in what looked a menacing attitude, but it turned out that she was not at all hostile, but was in fact only begging for biscuits, for which purpose she was accustomed to waylay travelers passing along this road. Alas, we had no biscuits, so the she-bear climbed upon the wooden balustrade by the side of the road and walked along it as a tightrope, while the two cubs turned somersaults on the opposite bank, all evidently offering an entertainment in return for food. Luckily, at this moment, another car arrived with plenty of biscuits, so the bears were fed quite delicately from hand to mouth and thoroughly photographed, and we resumed our journey. We don't do this anymore. So why am I telling you about it? It shows that Sir Winston Churchill loved Uganda, and he loved my country too. Though his behavior is incorrect by today's standards, it was completely accepted in his day, and he shared and relished in the enjoyment of new places and adventures wholeheartedly and without reservation. Oh, let me just try this again. There we are. Next slide, here we are. In any event, in both our countries, crowds came out to see and hear this great leader, and they went away sincerely impressed. But why did they come? What was it about this leader that inspired the admiration, courage, and determination of heads of state and millions of common people? We all know that Churchill was charismatic, that his mastery of the English language was outstanding for its ability to elicit just the response he wanted. The essential reason people came, though, is because Churchill led by example. He tackled his challenges with humanity and compassion. The crowds came and many times paid good money because they may have read his dispatches or heard about some of his military adventures in lands far removed from their own ordinary lives. He lived life to the fullest and he had stories to tell. But beyond that, he knew what he was talking about. He had honestly lived the deeds and seen the events of which he spoke. His talks were modest and engaging without flowery rhetoric, using the power of common words. But according to a report of his speech in Edmonton on August 8th in 1929, he made every person in the room believe that they were important to him. He exhibited the qualities then which allowed him to become the person who saved Europe and the world from the Nazi evil. Here are a few ways that Churchill led by example. First of all, he knew that it was of paramount importance to live in the way that you are trying to lead. I no longer listen to what people say, he said. I just watch what they do. Behavior never lies. He had no time for hypocrisy. He had a fierce love of his country and heritage and a profound desire to share the best qualities he found there. He felt a duty to serve these ideals, and he served tirelessly. He lived with courage and optimism, winning honors in battle and subjecting himself to fierce humiliation in politics, thereby inspiring others to be courageous in whatever endeavor they faced. He never gave up. And when he suffered personal defeats, he learned from them and continued to work to achieve his goals. Success is not fatal. Whoops, I said that wrong. Sorry. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. He worked long, hard hours, and he expected those around him to work hard too. His example allowed the people who followed him to accomplish more than they ever expected of themselves. And he said, "It is not enough that we do our best. Sometimes we must do what is required." He grabbed joy wherever it could be found, and he shared his immense enthusiasm for life. For example, Churchill always threw himself into Christmas festivities with a house full of guests. In 1932, he sent all the children scurrying around the house to find companions for a Christmas gift of brandy he received. They didn't have to hunt very long before they came up with a really respectably large collection. He spent the rest of the holiday relaxing while painting bottlescape. Another Christmas, when staff had days off, he stomped off wet and shivering, and stoked the fire himself to keep his outdoor swimming pool hot enough for he and his guests to bathe in on Christmas Day. I believe 90 degrees was his preferred temperature. However, in 1940, when days were very dark indeed, and festivity could not be a priority, he said, "No holidays can be given at Christmas, but every endeavor should be made to allow members of the staff to attend divine service on Christmas Day, either in the morning or the afternoon. My own plans will be to work either here or in London continuously." And so he did work. But we are not Churchill. How can we use lessons from his life to help us learn to lead by example? Let me tell you a little bit about how the example of Churchill's leadership continues to influence our Edmonton Churchill Society, and indeed our city of Edmonton. Edmonton is a modern city, home to nearly 1 million people. It sits between the northern edge of the Great Plains of North America and the northern boreal forest. We call ourselves the gateway to the north. The Churchill Society of Edmonton was established in 1964 by community leaders and veterans. It's the first Churchill Society in the world, and Sir Winston Churchill himself endorsed it. It was originally founded as a gentleman's club to celebrate the sacrifices and achievements of the Second World War, and it promoted the legacy of Winston Churchill's leadership, his humanity, his compassion, his determination and sense of duty. It kept fresh the sense of camaraderie and from the shared hardships of war, and it honored the heroic memory. Gala memorial banquets were held each year with much pomp and ceremony and featured the most notable speakers of the day, men who knew and worked with Churchill. Lords and ladies, earls, generals, and knights were hosted by our Churchill Society. It's an impressive list. But time moved on, as it does, and these men died. Our society continued with biographers such as Sir Martin Gilbert, and most recently, Andrew Roberts. Our list of distinguished speakers continues to grow, and we're excited again about hosting Alan Packwood when COVID restrictions allow this type of gathering. Each speech was recorded and transcribed, and it provides a unique resource that has been published by our society as the Heroic Memory in Volume 1 for the first 25 years, and Volume 2 for the second 25 years. In addition, money was raised and a statue commissioned by famous sculptor Neman. He is the sculptor who created the statue of Churchill that sits in Parliament Square in London. Our Churchill statue sits in our city's heart, named Churchill Square. Churchill's legacy has been successfully promoted by our society and throughout our province. We have a subway stop named Churchill Station. There's a Churchill Park, a Churchill Mountain Range, Churchill Crescent, Churchill Avenue, 2 Churchill High Schools, a Churchill Aquatic Center, and recently our sister society in Calgary commissioned a Churchill statue for their city. The society soon evolved to include women, and we raised money to offer scholarships to young Albertans for studies in Cambridge and Oxford. Since the Churchill scholarships were established, 26 men and women have completed their PhDs at Churchill College in Cambridge, and 4 have completed their degrees at Oxford. They've made great contributions to our province, country, and internationally in the fields of engineering, science, IT, mathematics, medicine, history, and business, and some have become our government leaders. Debate, speech, and essay competitions for high school students have been held for many years, involving more than 1,000 students. Winners receive cash prizes, excuse me, a complimentary ticket to the Gala Memorial Banquet, and an introduction to the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta, the guest speaker, and other dignitaries. Many of these students are inspired to continue their quest for excellence, and they go on to achieve success in their further education and their careers. Student winners may be invited to become directors of our society, where they can explore their leadership potential. Age is no barrier. But like many volunteer organizations that focus on history, we have faced challenges. One of our challenges has been an aging and shrinking membership. The people who founded our society with optimism and camaraderie have passed on. After all, it was more than 50 years ago. Even their children have become elderly and with limited energy to help the society flourish. We need new young members. Another challenge is perceived lack of relevance. The history of Canada's role and Churchill's leadership in the Second World War is no longer taught in schools. Youth today are 3 or 4 generations removed from those dark days, and in our peaceful country, the horrors of war have no immediacy. Canada as a whole has become a diverse and multicultural society, and many new Canadians have completely different experiences of the Second World War. Our lives today are so far removed from those in Churchill's day, our experience so different that we must find new points of connection. Our society is focusing on other concerns facing our world today, and some would argue that these existential crises, such as the pandemic and climate change, might destroy our civilization just as surely as the Nazis might have done. A new challenge is outright hostility. Emotions run high as people try to build a more just world. Truth gets lost. Historical figures are scapegoated for the errors and attitudes of entire past generations. Reason and civil discourse do not prevail against slogans and anger, and alternative stories take root in our evolving public identity. So how do we deal with all this? We study the past not with a closed mind, but with an open heart. As Churchill said in his 4-year plan speech in March 1943, tradition may play its part, but broader systems must rule. I'm happy to say we've accomplished some important work in our society. To deal with shrinking membership and engage younger members while still honoring those who have served the society loyally for decades, we have revamped our membership structure and pricing. We now have 3 levels of membership, beginning with student memberships at $10, regular memberships at $30, and a global membership for the very keen at $90. This global membership also includes membership in the International Churchill Society. For convenience, people can purchase a membership online, but we're happy to accommodate our older members who prefer to still send a check in the mail. We are active in recruiting and mentoring our young board members. Our student competitions provide a good source for recruitment. We listen to them and we are learning, and we're less stuffy. Although our gala banquet is a black tie and evening gown affair for those who love to get dressed up, people are welcomed and encouraged to fully participate whatever they're wearing. No one will be turned away nor looked down upon for their dress. We've seen that all attendees, however, do enjoy the pomp and ceremony, which has become rare and entertaining in our casual Western society. To become more relevant, we use new words to describe Churchill depending on our audience. We've seen that some audiences do not want to hear about duty or even sacrifice, although these are well understood by many. Our communications focus has been on ideas like leadership and citizenship that matter to people today. We also promote civil discourse to everyone, and we never take political sides. We provide competition in speech, debate, and essay with topics that stimulate critical thinking and connections with the past. The speech and debate competitions are open to the public at no cost. To deal with hostility to historical features, and especially Churchill, we reach out to groups with similar ideals, and we are building strong alliances. We share strategies with other Churchill societies, and I believe this strengthens each one of us. We prepare for controversy. We pay attention to developing news and prepare our speaking points just in case. We host casual public events to promote the society so that we will be seen as a force for good in our community. We promote leadership, citizenship, and strengthened communities through civil discourse, connecting to history, and encouraging critical thinking. The leaders we inspire today will rise to meet the challenges of tomorrow. We are not trying to create leaders who think the same. We are driven to help inspire and educate young leaders who can solve the difficulties we face today and into the future. Threats will rise. Challenges to our democracy will mount. But it is the leaders who can think critically and beyond ideology while embracing the lessons of our past who will rise to their finest hours when we need them most. We lead by example. We are the Sir Winston Churchill Society of Edmonton. We have been since 1964. Although we were the first, we are not alone. We are connected to a vibrant global network of Churchill societies that strengthens us as we help students rise to their immense potential. It's 1921. We know who we are. Sorry, it's 2021. Holy crow. It's 2021. We know who we are, even if we don't remember the year, and we are ready to tell the world about it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Elisebeth Checkel, for sharing with us your wonderful presentation, and very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Winston Churchill, who was Liberal Home Secretary in 1910.
Pardon?
And his friend, Conservative MP, FS, to join the venerable political dining club known as just the club. Although both of them had friends in it, the members thought that Churchill and his move was too controversial. So Mr. Churchill and Mr. Smith established their own club, to be called, by contrast, the other club. On 17th November 2011, the other club was opened in Auckland, New Zealand. Mr. Gary Rosell, a representative of the Churchill Society of New Zealand in the GCLR discussion series 2021, is here with us today. Mr. Gale is active in environment and heritage protection for 35 years. Completed the heritage site economic feasibility studies for the European Union intercultural programs, projects on social and cultural capital asset impact assessment, and he has many other obligations in Europe and within New Zealand. Please, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce to call Mr. Gary Rosell to share with us what really inspired the other dining club of New Zealand. Thank you very much.
Kia kora, takahehi, te mo. I thank the opportunity to all the organisers of the Churchill Foundation, and just to acknowledge that our club and members also are looking forward to being able to hear much of what has been spoken about today. So what I have taken the opportunity, we are only a small and mainly informal dining institute, replicating much of what Churchill did when he formed his club back in 1911, being this is nearly over 100 years, from my understanding. So what I'm about to talk to you about is probably taking more of a political stance, just as Churchill did when he was also bringing up his aspects of what he saw in that time of crisis. And I think the main drive behind myself today is that I had the privilege in 2012 to host our university student leaders to a World Global Congress on the Youth Future. And the results of that, and this is held in Seoul in Korea, where there was over 2,000 university student leaders were brought together. I put myself down as being the oldest youth amongst the group, and probably where I find myself taking much of a political stance with many of the young people today. So I'm going to give more of a political stance as much as what we would normally do in one of our Churchill informal dinners. And I just want to start by saying a question to you all out there to think about is, who would you choose as a leader? Some examples may be, in this case, would be, how would the choice of one is a decorated soldier, is a vegetarian, and an artist at the time loved dogs? Well, we have two, a writer who drank alcohol, smoked every day, and also suffered from depression. Or three, a wealthy businessman who was also an invalid, but he did have a mistress. Or is it an ex-priest, a war hero who had a farming background? Or is it a slave owner, a professional soldier or farmer? If you look at those five options, and when we are looking at what are those personal attributes of a leader, we look back at these and I state again. One, the decorated soldier, vegetarian, and artist who loved dogs, Adolf Hitler. Two, the writer who drank alcohol and smoked every day and suffered from depression, our own Sir Winston Churchill. Three, a wealthy businessman who, though was an invalid, also maintained a mistress, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Or four, the ex-priest, war hero from a farming background, F. Stalin. And five, slave owner, professional soldier, and farmer. That, of course, was George Washington. So the question we ask ourselves, how does one choose one's destiny? And what the question again is, what maketh a leader? Today we face and we acknowledge our biggest crisis is climate change as we battle our way through the COVID-19. So there's just as much in terms of the challenges of our battlefields as what we face in this world today. Is it the nature or the nurture of the person? Is it their childhood upbringing? Is it that family unit? Is it the education standards or achievements? Leadership works best as an individual or as a team member. There's much to face, and are still in terms of deciding on our leadership qualities. In our Aotearoa, which is New Zealand, our Churchill Dining Club, we meet together just to share moments of Winston Churchill's life. It's a snapshot at each meeting. A member may relate a specific incident, an aspect of his life of interest to us. In many cases, we have a wide range of professional people. And in that case, say a judge, who relate the aspect of a justice actions from a legal perspective on Winston Churchill's interference with the verdicts of the convicted war criminals at the World War II Nuremberg trials. Why did he intervene? And an economist member, and though myself am as an economist, do aspects of the effects of Winston Churchill's, his reasons when he came to introduce a wealth tax to counter the poverty gap in the 1920s. In relating this leadership and leading from others to relate to Winston Churchill's actions and his prophecy, the local viewpoint from our Aotearoa heritage of how does one interpret his actions if in the context of the terms of our own colonial and Indigenous past culture upheavals and understanding. So we look at that, remembering his lifetime matches the same lifetime of our own colonial period as New Zealand developed as a nation. As Churchill went through his life cycle, New Zealand was going through the same period of life cycle as it headed towards nationhood. And taking this challenge in respect to what actions are required and looking towards and using that heritage of resolving our climate change and the impacts. One needs to interpret these issues in our own cultural and social impact assessments on our own colonial Indigenous people. This past aspect is important. This gives a context to the following discussion points in this paper, as I acknowledge in a sphere of self-interest of ourselves in facing this challenge. This factor of leadership must resound with the values of the people it impacts on. Historian Michael Wood, the BBC journalist and professor, says all of what we talk about here today goes to show why history matters. It's not a prophecy, but sure as hell gives you some sense of where we might be heading. So the historical perspective establishes the page on which we need to write the text and follow this journey of learning from our past, as that is our map to achieve a destiny of resolution in today. The Maori Indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, to resolve their political place in a colonial state in the beginnings, have their say through the Maori Representation Act of 1867, which introduced a dual political system in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Later again, that solution was reinforced with the Electoral Reform Act in 1990, where Maori electorates were based on proportional representation, so they retained that voice in our parliament. Conclusion is it's important in any political system to resolve the climate change challenge by self-determination and inclusion of all people, and not just by those geographic borders or representations as established in the colonial past. As each social cultural group has solutions relevant to their own community values and needs. Therefore, leadership must take on many facets that represent aspects. Maybe turn to the page. Thoughts of the ideas of all Indigenous people to making a meaningful contribution to leadership is inclusive of the people it impacts on. He mahi a wea koe ka kia ko hea wea toha is a Maori proverb from the Indigenous people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. It means, is a river never to be crossed? This proverb promotes the concept that difficulties can be surmounted and is used to encourage one to persevere because obstacles can be overcome eventually. The global challenge of today is climate change. What do the potential leaders need to do to meet the challenge of creating a world that is sustainable? In response, again, I refer again to our Maori proverbs. Ka tia poe tauwhai te whaia kia taha ko te pae te hea. It means to seek out a distant horizons, cherish those you attain. This proverb encourages one to set goals, to strive to achieve them, no matter how distant or difficult they may seem. In my response, from my own experience, solution, we have. These are the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Integration of all global crisis factors is intertwined in our world today. And we must achieve a cooperation of all parties, as each unit or goal is dependent on the other. And what we need to have is a convention, a UN convention that every country, society sign up to, which is then, of course, enacted within the parliamentary systems of each political state. Climate change is a collage of challenges at many levels and requires emerging leaders to be alert to answers around them. This is a case of having scissors, not a pen. We need to learn to cut through the distractions and false accusations that are found in the storytelling of this climate change, as the outcome is to be found in many sources, and today be film, dialogue, pictures, diaries, and participants themselves. And it's from these we will get our leaders. To lead is an elusive quality, and in this paper I've tried to provide clues to what work we need to achieve a sustainable world. And as stated by the only the Queen Mother at the time, when she said, our work is the rent we pay for our room on the earth. Well, it's time we got working. The work of all people is required today. It's the most important in Earth's history to be achieved only by, as again, my last point is the Maori proverb, He toa takitine takatu toha ideha ki totoniraka. That states that bravery is the bravery of many, not just one. So the point I say to you today is one warrior is not the answer. In that context, one needs to show that many brave actions from many is needed to fight this battle to save the world. To complete is when and where one has cooperation, teamwork, or making a contribution. As traditionally of the chiefs and their followers, today it will take many leaders or chiefs to solve this crisis. The big hurdle to first overcome is the poor economic condition of our third world, which arises from the colonial heritage of the past where colonies and the colony masters have a debt to pay for those resource robbing of the poor nation's wealth. Economist Batista listeners to examine what is not seen. If we cannot change all the world at once, the debt relief of poor nations is a task of the United Nations. To take a lead and not the World Trade Organization, which has a self-interest. The time is to get rid of differences between scientists and economists and calculate the costs and benefits to the community values. This is the lesson that we must take from this COVID-19 crisis. The knowledge science comes first. We have learned this in New Zealand. Today, you would not acknowledge that we have this COVID crisis. I'm all vaccinated. I have friends. We go about our normal life. We sit at rugby stadiums and go to concerts. And that is because we've acknowledged that the science must come first. And this must be transferred to the climate crisis. And this will only happen if one needs to avoid those government and intergovernmental bodies, as they tend to defend their political power base by the old catchphrases, all must be alike. People of the world are different. Each needs we respond to our own social, cultural, economic values and terms based on a proven science. To focus this outcome is to have positivity, is to take a first step for all humankind. As Winston Churchill stated, I am an optimist. It does not seem too much use being anything else. And his fellow political partner, Prime Minister David Lloyd George, also stated at the time, anything can be achieved in small, deliberate steps, but there are times you need courage to take a great leap, as you can't cross a chasm in 2 small steps. Michael Wood, the historian, again says, all of what we talk about here today goes to show why history matters. And though history is not a prophecy, it as sure as hell gives you, again, that same sense of where we might be heading. The positivity comes from an attitude of being thankful for what the world offers us today. We have to be grateful for what we have now to appreciate the needs of going into the future. We have to, in taking on our convictions, our leaders must walk the talk and understand that leadership is more convincing when you do the walk and not only do the talk. To gain a wider perspective of these times is to hear from our historians as they reflect on a wider revolt against the political and intellectual establishment. And as is stated, of course, the biggest history story today is climate change, which is rapidly becoming a catastrophe. Tom Holland, again, the historian and broadcaster, said, environmental degradation clearly remains a huge story and is not just climate change either, but is also the mass extinction and encroachment of human onto all reaches of the earth. History will always be political for the same reason that politics will always be rooted in history. Question is asked, why? Why does this matter? It does matter. It is the technology of today, as the younger generation has grown up well informed about modern history via the media, internet, social media. They can look all this up and with the answers, science answers. In New Zealand, the climate change student protester today, these students by the year 2050, they'll be in their 40s and 50s. Today's students tell us from their protest placard messages that need to be listened to, there's a lack of trust in our leaders taking on the challenge of climate change. And I hold up for you a picture of the youth in New Zealand here are taking on this challenge. They are our leaders. It is them who are pushing the boundary. And this is seen just from reading the protest placards. I must acknowledge the first time I ever had to reference placards from a protest in the paper. All politicians are full of themselves and full of shit. Our future is not a popularity contest, but our survival. Where is the moral leadership? Kindness doesn't save our future. Our future lives are not a political poker game. So we need just to reflect. If you want the voice of the youth to be heard, you have to be there with them. We've had two main climate action protest marches here in New Zealand, where the children have just closed the schools themselves and walked out. Again, an example is to take literally, one is asking people to do the walk and not the talk, not drive to work as illustrated. For in New Zealand, our example is on average, we drive 12,000 kilometres a year. We emit 215 grams of CO2 per kilometre. However, the change over to EVs is reluctant. There's a macho feeling. A man is a man when he's driving his car, but it must be petrol. The more noise it makes, the better. But the pollutant and gas emissions to change is a cultural shift to more of a kindness and respect to the earth. New Zealand is in the top 20 countries of polluters. We're an embarrassing 18 tonnes of greenhouse gases per person per year. But our big marketing image around the world is we are clean and green. False news. This is a marketing brand that we must again take our scissors and cut through. In responding to being clean and green, we are not. Greta Thunberg puts it, you're never too small to make a difference, but where do we look? And this looking is these questions that we need to take on board. Do we look to the role of leadership? What part will it play in resolving the climate change responses? My response is it will take more than one leader. We need multiple leaders out there. The questions are, how will climate change impact on the global community and its resources? Catastrophe. That's a simple answer. How will the impact directly contribute to the economic prosperity of the global villages? We need to start measuring our debt values in people, not in dollars. It's time to have a well-being budget. What is the cost? Will it be a critical issue for social, cultural, and environment reasons? Well, and we have at the moment a Noah flood proportion coming at us. What is an appropriate response, therefore, to an investigation is to identify actions and changes that lead to resolving these climate change factors. Earth must become our ark. We don't have our ark, we don't have a future. And as we said, and to put it in Churchill's words, time to pass with relief from the time of tossing sea of cause and theory to the firm ground of result and fact. A leadership style and approach to awakening to the fact that it is all people's responsibility for safeguarding our global future, social, cultural, and economic policies. A leadership style must be macro level sustainability plans implemented at all levels. The economic value is a base from where the political capital comes first. Actuaries calculate that government investing just $1 in climate resilience today will save $5 in losses tomorrow. That is a good return on public investment. Rich countries can afford this, but developing countries, by contrast, cannot. All while the water is rising and coming towards us, Noah's flood is a reality of today. How many days will it take on betting on? As with a poker hand, as a gambler of global recognition of climate change outcomes start. It's time to stop holding a poker hand. We need a survival toolkit. And to know this, in many cases, we can refer in today's media of young people and within song. And from my day, of course, is Kenny Rogers' Gambler Survival. We need to, at this point in time, excuse if I'm out of tune, know when to hold, know when to fold, know when to wait, know when to walk, know when to run. It's not time to quit when the deal is done. It's a time for political talk is over. As the eye seeth is surer than what these ears can hear. Michael would repeat, says all of what we may talk about here today goes to show why history matters. And though history is not a prophecy, it sure as hell gives you some sense of where we might be heading. And in the end, as Churchill words, as he would transpose them, is, now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it perhaps the end of the beginning. Watch this space. Te kaha, te tahi, my thank you, and my regards to all the people who have made this event happen. And I acknowledge and thank you on behalf of the youth of New Zealand. Te kaha.
Thank you, Mr. Gary. Thank you very much for a wonderful and well expertised presentation. Who would you choose
You've cut out.
as a leader? Thank you very much for your presentation. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sharing with us your leadership skills. And thank you very much for today. Our first presenter, President Checkel, together with her Executive Secretary, Mr. Robert Chaffee, also from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, lead a volunteer organization that provides scholarships to high school and university students from their province, and that is Alberta. An interest in history, democratic values, and the support for education what led Mr. Chaffee to the Right Honorable Sir Winston Churchill Society of Edmonton. Please join me to welcome Mr. Robert Chaffee, as he will be sharing with us his interest in educational Churchill Society. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashadhu. And my thanks to the Churchill Institution of East Africa and the National Churchill Museum for staging this roundtable. We are honored to be invited here today to share our thoughts with you. Warm Alberta greetings from us to all who have attended this morning. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm to speak today of educational Churchill and the Churchill Society. I'll relate a brief history of our society and its works. We'll examine the definition of education, and I will discuss Winston Churchill's education and our society's strategy in supporting students in his name. Lastly, I will discuss some of today's challenges to the proper education of future leaders and what our society has accomplished. As Elisebeth told you earlier, the Right Honorable Sir Winston Spencer Churchill Society of Edmonton was formed in January 1964. A small group of local gentlemen, inspired by the Robbie Burns dinner they had just enjoyed, decided that they should form a society to similarly celebrate Winston Churchill. They thought he was as worthy of an annual dinner as Robbie Burns, and had the added advantage of still being alive. These gentlemen were veterans of wartime military service, so they resolved to stage their annual dinners in the ceremony and style of a British military mess dinners, including a formal dress code, black tie or mess kit for the gentlemen. Evening wear was stipulated for the ladies, but membership was for men only. One of the founding gentlemen wrote to Sir Winston asking for permission to establish a society in his name, and Churchill's private secretary conveyed Sir Winston's approval and blessing. The first annual memorial banquet was held at in May 1965 at the landmark Hotel Macdonald in downtown Edmonton. 650 gentlemen gathered to honor the lately deceased Winston Churchill and to hear Field Marshal Lord Harding of Petherington speak of his experiences with Winston. This set a pattern which continued for the first 25 years or so. Our keynote speakers were prominent and often famous people who had worked with or for Churchill or had otherwise known him. The banquets were major events with military bands, military staff car and driver for the honored guests, and police escorts from airport to hotel. Although ladies, as I said, were not considered for membership, they were sort of welcome at the banquets in a separate room with piped in audio from the main event. One of these ladies, who's still with us, has remarked that when membership and full privilege was extended to women in the 80s, she was not entirely happy to be suffering the cigar smoke in the main banquet hall. Now we have our first female president, and 4 of our 8 officers and directors are currently women. Odd, I thought, that the smoking took longer to winkle out than the ritual misogyny. The early keynote speakers included individuals like General Mark Clark, former British Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Sir Alec Douglas Home, and Sir Martin Gilbert, to name only a 3. The annual memorial banquets ran for 54 years until COVID-19 pandemic measures forced us to cancel our 2020 and now our 2021 events. Mr. Packwood is waiting anxiously to visit Edmonton and has postponed twice now. From about 1990 on, as Winston's adult contemporaries became scarce, our guest speakers were historians, authors, and some of his descendants. In those years, the Society was honored to host the Lady Soames, Conrad Black, Sir John Keegan, grandson Winston S. Churchill, and great-grandson Randolph Churchill, who is now patron of our Society. The Society chose fairly early on to honor Churchill's memory by establishing and supporting the Churchill debate competitions for high school students. The first Churchill debate competitions were held in the late 1960s. Speech competitions began in the 90s, and essay writing was adding in the early 2000s to include students whose schools did not have debate and speech societies. The Society also began a scholarship to support students from Alberta in pursuit of a PhD in engineering at Churchill College, Cambridge, which was established at about the same time as our Society, and created an endowment fund at the university to manage that scholarship. The first Cambridge scholar was chosen in 1978, and the 26th, I believe, is presently enrolled. Recipients are chosen from among applicants by a committee of members of the Churchill Society and also from members of the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Alberta. A foundation was created as an extension of the Society in 1988 for the purpose of raising a statue of Churchill in downtown Edmonton in Churchill Square, as Elisebeth mentioned, and to establish a humanities scholarship at Oxford University. The statue was placed in 1989. The Churchill statue in Oxford Foundation continues to operate. 4 students from the University of Alberta have attended Oxford on this scholarship. The foundation now raises funds for both scholarships with the help of Churchill Society's members, friends, and conscripts. We believe that citizens and leaders should be widely educated and grounded in factual history. After listening to Gary just now, I'd say, I'd like to phrase that as must be, not should be. Our leaders in government and industry, and really all of us, must be capable of civil discourse in matters large and small. Supporting education sounds like a high principle, but what is education? I think we should look at this. My old copy of the OED provides these definitions that are useful in our context. We're not really talking about nurturing animals here, but this first one is very general, but it's the idea that the next 2 bullets here, the idea of bringing up specifically or more likely young persons, but the manner in which a person has been brought up with reference to, well, social station, okay, but kind of manners, habits acquired, calling or employment prepared for. And the 3rd bullet talks also about schooling, of course, which is what we think of education, but also really, if you look at the rest of it, life experience, the things you do. And so when we look at this and think about it, well, academic classroom training obviously is part of education, but so is a wider kind of learning. Now, Winston Churchill attended Harrow and Sandhurst. His recent biographer, Andrew Roberts, paints for us a picture of a young Winston as a motivated student of poetry at Harrow, especially Macaulay, and military history. Neither a top student nor a failed one, his time at Harrow was not particularly happy. He was frequently disciplined for the disrespectful repartee he employed with his teachers there. But he did receive a thorough grounding in English grammar instruction at Harrow. As he wrote, as related by Roberts, "Thus I got into my bones the essential structure of the ordinary British sentence, which is a beautiful thing." Speaking at our 2019 banquet, Roberts suggested that Churchill was almost entirely self-educated because he had to be. He went to Harrow. This was obviously a sort of a playful swipe at Harrow, but it was nonetheless true, and I think meant to be. Winston, by turns, criticized and ignored by his parents during those years, became engaged in a wider education. To again quote Roberts from Churchill, Walking with Destiny, he kept himself busy with all manner of eclectic pastimes. He was a member of his Victoria's House swimming team, wrote for the school magazine, The Harrovian, collected stamps, birds' eggs, and autographs, built a model theater, played chess, bred silkworms, drew landscapes, and played the cello. He struggled with some subjects. Mathematics has been mentioned, I can sympathize, and had some difficulty with exams. He was admitted to Sandhurst after 3 tries at the entrance exam and was then accepted for the cavalry, which apparently had a lower academic bar. So his time at Harrow, despite its emotional and cane-inflicted pain, did provide tools and perhaps a reinforced drive to match his natural curiosity. As a famous leader, he eventually received 14 honorary degrees and some other academic recognitions. In 1946, he remarked, "I'm surprised that in my later life, I should have become so experienced at taking degrees, when as a schoolboy, I was so bad at taking examinations. In fact, one might almost say that no one ever passed so few examinations and received so many degrees." He studied with purpose history, classics, and politics, while a junior officer in a quiet garrison posting in India. In 1895, seeking income and experience, combat experience, he spent a period of leave, traveled to Cuba to report on the rebellion there against Spanish colonial rule. His career in published journalism began that with that 18-day stint where he came under fire for the first time. He continued writing, experienced armed combat in 3 more wars in India, Egypt, and Belgium. This was all education, I think, in the wider sense of bringing up and habits acquired, calling prepared for, not all from the professor and classroom. He eventually wrote, by one estimate, somewhere between 8 and 10 million words in 43 books, thousands of newspaper and magazine articles, and at least 1 film script, which was not produced. He famously advised an aspiring politician, I believe an American, to study history. Study history. In history lies all the secrets of statecraft. And in midlife, he turned to painting and brick masonry as productive pastimes. Whoops. Oh, that is the right one. In the 1920s, he wrote the 2 essays for Strand magazine, which were later combined under the title Painting as a Pastime, in which he discussed the benefits of recreational pastimes which used faculties and abilities not employed in one's highly responsible profession. He described in that book with lyrical delight the utter joy he found in painting with oils. Now, my wife, an artist, told me after reading Painting as a Pastime that it was like receiving tender and inspiring wisdom from one's grandfather. Sorry about that. Here it is. As Elisebeth, I believe, mentioned earlier, we reviewed our direction and policy in a strategic planning exercise in 2019 and 20. We wanted to set a course for the 21st century and continue to support education in Churchill's name with his remarkable career and written legacy as examples. Through careful management of costs and assets, the support of our loyal members, and the generosity of our corporate sponsors, we have managed to maintain our educational programs and have now some ability to expand them. We believe that Sir Winston was an exemplar of the virtues listed in our mission statement: civil discourse, connecting to history, critical thinking. But current times, and this has been mentioned a bit, have not been entirely kind to his legacy. He has come in for his share of rightful criticism, of course, but more lately he's being demonized by some for his conservatism and his loyalty to crown and empire. He's been accused of crimes that he did not commit and is being held responsible by some for events he could not control. These sentiments have certainly not helped our membership numbers. Humanity has never been free of serious challenges. The life and death struggle against fascism in the 1940s gave way to the Cold War and the chilling threat of nuclear Armageddon and the end of everything. Now, in the 21st century, the threats we face are no less serious. And I tend to agree with Gary. I think they're much more serious. The global evolution of industry and technology have provided material benefits and health outcomes scarcely imaginable a century ago. But such progress is neither guaranteed and certainly not universal. World War II was won, and the Cold War did not lead to thermonuclear oblivion. But poverty, famine, disease, and war have never been eliminated. It is becoming apparent now that our life and death struggle will be now against global heating. A warming climate will aggravate other serious economic and political troubles, threatening desperate competition between nations and human migration on a scale we have never seen before. The leaders of tomorrow will have to find a way to reach through the 21st century's chief barriers to civil discourse. They face an enormous challenge. Today, digital communication technology is both boon and bane to public education. In his book, A Cry from the Far Middle, P.J. O'Rourke titled his chapter about the internet, "Whose bright idea was it to make sure every idiot in the world was in touch with every other idiot?" He's a satirist, of course, but he identifies something very real here. Digital technology does bring us together, but too often into our various ideological solitudes where we need not engage in rational discussion of important ideas. Instead, we are as likely to find our articles of faith, however bizarre and counterfactual, to be reinforced, not challenged. This technology greatly expands the wide and rapid spread of ideas. Any ideas. The same digital magic that links researchers the world over in the war against COVID-19 and worse also linked the planning of those who stormed the US Capitol this past January. The technology that we are using today in this global conversation, this marvelous technology, has also enabled the spread of numerous theories of no scientific merit and a dismal roll of screeds denying everything from human-caused climate change to the Project Apollo moon landings to vaccine safety to the Holocaust. Many or most of these notions predate the internet, of course, but now can reach a much, much larger audience than ever before. The digital universe brings dark opportunities also. Many blogs and websites are monetized, with advertisers paying the proprietors per click, providing a motive to write whatever people will be drawn to read. Among those operators are reckless, mercenary, or fanatical latter-day pamphleteers of every stripe and orientation, publishing to mostly uncritical audiences. There are anonymous, malevolent actors on behalf of various states, posting false narratives designed to inflame existing divisive sentiments in target nations. And on that last, I suspect we do not know the entire story of who's doing what to whom. This is all a sea change. In Sir Winston's time, one had to get published in print to reach a large readership. This generally meant having your work, and especially journalism, checked and edited, fact-checked by independent and unbiased professionals. There were standards and no good way around them. Web technology now and its illusion of democratization of dialogue have removed those constraints for those who do not like them. What do we do about this? Well, history has not been, in my experience, a widely popular topic among high school students. If it is being taught in some form, and I hope it is not connecting with many students because of its lack of immediacy for young people. For an example, I should really back that up. For some young people, again, I'm thinking about what Gary just said. Yes, not all of them. For example, however, I found a mainstream news article about the recent Holocaust and Awareness survey done in the United States. It was just released this last fall, I believe. The survey looked at Holocaust knowledge among millennials and Generation Z people across the United States and found that 63% of respondents did not know that 6 million Jews had been murdered. 36% thought that 2 million had been murdered. 48% could not name a single camp or ghetto of the 10,000 or so that were established. Now, if this example seems irrelevant, that makes my argument for me, I think. This happened a long time ago to other people. We must never forget it. Among those who do not respond, who did not rather respond to that survey, this I wonder about, how many had not learned enough about history to be able to resist the Holocaust deniers' blogs that they might be following, or the climate deniers, or the deep state conspiracy theorists, or so on. Now, draconian regulation and censorship, I think, can be relied upon to create more problems than it solves, and certainly would drive nasty content onto the dark web. Education is the most effective defense. I think probably the only one, really, because it can produce citizens and leaders who will talk to each other. This is going to become very necessary. In addition to the scholarships to Cambridge and Oxford mentioned earlier, we have attracted over the years, as Elisebeth said, over 1,000 students to our competitions and scholarship programs. Of these, over 450 have won scholarships. And as she said, 26 have gone to Cambridge and 4 to Oxford. Many of our scholars and student competitors have found success in leadership roles in business, the academe, science, and the law. Some of them, in their successful careers, have supported our work in turn with sponsorship of our events and awards. Our very first Cambridge scholar, Dr. Checkel, had a career as a professor of mechanical engineering at the University of Alberta, and now is on the board of the foundation. One of our former competitors is the current member of parliament for an Edmonton area federal riding. I got the right one up. Churchill's education in English grammar, his wide scope of interests, academic and recreational, helped him grasp the line that led to his remarkable literary and political careers. His education in and outside of the classroom matured him into the writer, leader, and public servant that he became. We have seen now how our society was formed to honor his memory and how our support for education developed. We reviewed the meaning of the term education and how Winston Churchill was educated in and out of the classroom. We have reviewed some of this century's emerging challenges to education and civil discourse. And we have seen what our society has accomplished as we work against some of those currents. There are great mentors of many subjects working with students every day. They are the teachers, and we applaud their work. We are not in possession of a nostrum for the needs of humanity, but we can help to encourage the habits of responsible citizenship and enlightened leadership in our students. And in thinking of support for a wider education, I think it would be interesting to see how our grant application criteria might handle a request for support from a fine arts program, or perhaps an apprenticeship in brick masonry. We have some work to do. Thank you for listening to me today, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robert Chaffee. And ladies and gentlemen, our speakers today, thank you very much for being with us today and sharing your wonderful presentation with us. Leadership, learning from others, like Winston Churchill, our influence as leaders will leave a lasting mark on our world's future. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to pass this program to my dear colleague, Mr. Timothy Lively at the America's National Churchill Museum, Westminster College in Missouri. Thank you very much and welcome, Mr. Timothy Lively.
Well, thank you, Ashadhu, and thank you to each of our speakers this morning, afternoon, wherever you may be. I found it fascinating to listen to each of you, and I'd like to maybe continue the conversation with a few questions and follow-ups. Elisebeth, you gave us a remarkable overview of your wonderful efforts in Edmonton. Historic. I should have known, but I did not know that yours was the first society. I'm glad to learn that today. And Gary, I do appreciate your slightly political take on things. I think Sir Winston would be proud of that. And Robert, your clarion call for education, I think is certainly heard, and you're preaching to the choir, I know, in this group. But to follow up, particularly on the subject and under the rubric of leadership, and looking to find ways that we all collectively, as those who admire and learn from and are inspired by, informed by Winston Churchill on a daily basis, how do we, what other steps can we continue to take to make him relevant? I know that each of you in one form or fashion said there are opportunities, but there are also challenges and obstacles here in engaging the next generation. As many of you have noticed, history is not studied as much as it once was, and when it is, it's not always made to come alive. History, in many cases, unfortunately, seems old, and it seems to me that one of the things we need to do is make it seem new and alive. And I guess that's one of my questions collectively. And as we look to solve some of the challenges that tomorrow's leaders will face, how do we make history relevant and very much engaging today? I mean, it's one of the things we face here at the museum. Churchill to the Cold War, which in many ways was launched here in Fulton, seems like the Peloponnesian War to students today. It seems like so long ago. How can we make history come alive for the next generations? And maybe I'll start with Elisebeth and hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. History is of such importance because seeing the past helps you know the future. We support our young leaders in their study of history and try to tie it to current events. For example, our essay competition that has just ended, the question was, the year is 2022 and the pandemic has been pretty much resolved. You are Prime Minister. Name your first 3 orders of business. And the prize is offered by our society, so students know that we want to see them look into that a little bit, but at the same time, they have to find the relevance in the past that they can use to plan their first 3 orders of business. So there are references to Churchill in particular, but also they have to do a little bit of study of economics, a little bit of, some people looked at racial equality, how we can support our society going forward from the pretty much economic collapse and rebirth and live together more harmoniously, because it has given us all a chance to step back and see where we are and how they would go forward. It's also quite a good topic because they are asked to imagine themselves as leaders and think about the problems they might face, so they can look to history again to study that. So that's one of the ways we do it.
And Gary, there in New Zealand, your observations of the youth that are with their placards demanding change, are you finding that history can play a part in those that energy?
It's interesting at the moment, the New Zealand government has acknowledged there's been a big gap in the history, and they've just revamped now and made it compulsory in the history that New Zealand history is studied at all levels. That's acknowledgement that our society has let slip that past knowledge. So now it has been legislated basically into the curriculums of all the schools that New Zealand history is compulsory. My aspect about this is, I think we're underestimating today with the amount of Netflix and the movies. If you look at the ones that seem to be responding to are these movies that deal with history as related. And just sitting here looking through the movie list, is there a number of movies that go back to that period of time. There's one here called Curator, which talks about the Cuban crisis. Those aspects that children now are looking at, and that's very popular, and it is a younger audience that is attending those movies. So with this opening up, with the 75 years sort of top secret label placed on many archive material now becoming available, I think that is opening up a lot of interest. And also you look at the numbers of books. I have good librarian friends, and they're saying many actually books around the World War II, probably due to Max Hastings and his prolific contribution in that field of books that are coming out, and you have other ghostwriters to help you. And the other factor too, I've been involved with the Rotary in New Zealand here, and our RILA, which is the youth leadership program, and we're fortunately for many colleagues in the New Zealand Army who contribute to setting up this leadership training program, where it's always oversubscribed and young people wanting to get involved in this program. It's the usual sort of survival techniques and stress, and where they don't sleep for like 72 hours, they're put out in the field. And the response out of that is very moving, when those students have been selected by the employers, the bosses in the corporate, to partake in that course, which is leadership focused. And as I said, I previously have helped by being an instructor or respondent to selecting military leaders, officers for training from in the youth sector. So I find that quite optimistic. And again, I come back to go overseas to a youth congress and to see 2,000 university world leaders potentially who are already in a leadership role. And what I came out with was amazing sense of hope, thinking, wow, you know what I mean? These have got it, you know what I mean? I wish I had it at their age. So I am a great optimist, and as Churchill says, what's the point unless you're an optimist of being in the world? So I just have a great sense of faith and where our youth are going. And I do agree with Robert, the whole aspect of education, but I feel in some ways today, let the choices of education of those students, and I think our big protests here, and they've been very, very critical. The mayor in Christchurch got shouted down, as a public figure off the platform because she just got out there and gave platitudes, you know what I mean? They wanted to see the action, and they had her step down from how vocal. And these marches by our youth are really brilliant, and from Elisebeth, the critical factor today is what we've got to develop. And we have done that. Maybe we're being too successful. They are taking over under us, and we're not actually in our mainstream media acknowledging the fact that the youth have got their voice. And boy, me, I'm really optimistic. I think we're in good hands.
And Robert, you mentioned education as being critical going forward, and a couple of other things that I've noted here, and as I've heard you each speak, that not only education but travel. Gary, you said overseas travel by the youth is opens a lot of eyes, and attending global conferences. Interconnectivity like we have today is important, but actually seeing other places is also critically important. It was certainly true for Churchill, as Elisebeth, you mentioned. He visited Edmonton or Canada and Uganda and Fulton. Those travel experiences were also quite important. But Robert, your take on this topic.
I had a grade 10 social studies teacher who read to us from Herodotus. I remember this year. I remember passages from Herodotus's description of the Ionian revolt. One thing I think we can do, and I think I've seen this happening with our society in the 4 years or so I've been with it. So there's a bit of this. I mentioned in my talk that there are great mentors out there working with students. I think we need to hand them the tools to light those fuses in their students the way that fuse was lit in me in grade 10. That charge didn't detonate until I was nearly 20 years old. But when it did, I started reading narrative history and I've never looked back. Yes, I think that if we, and Elisebeth was saying, like these wonderful topics that we're starting to come up with for our debate, our speech topics, we work with the University of Alberta Debate Society, and so we have their expertise with our debate competitions, and they come up with some great stuff. It's not always about Churchill, but it's usually about history and how it relates to now. So I think if we give the instructors that work with the students, we give them these tools that they can use, these things that they can, these competitions and opportunities that they can show their students, look, you know, like, and relate history to today in that way in the topics, and let those gifted mentors light those fuses. I think that's one approach we can use.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it's something that I've long believed, that if we teach the teachers, you know, it's great to have field trips, for instance, come here to the America's National Churchill Museum. We love it. We love to see those bright young minds, you know, open up. But you know, if we can touch 30 students at a time in a field trip to the museum, but if we can touch 30 teachers, how many then students are you touching? And so that's something that's really, really, I think, important to recognize. And so I agree with you wholeheartedly on that front. Switching to another topic, and climate change and science. Well, Robert, I know you put in a plug for perhaps studying painting and bricklaying. The study of science, it's something that is something Churchill embraced, and I think it's something that leaders need to embrace. You know, Churchill was brilliant in his you know, science, having science advisors. The prof was Lindemann was around and advised him throughout his career. He spoke glowingly of science in many of his most famous public speeches, and endorsed its importance. And I think in many respects, leaders today need to embrace science to solve some of our biggest problems, like the pandemic or like climate change. And I'm curious to know, in your Churchill worlds, you know, we don't automatically gravitate to that part of Churchill's interest, but I think we need to do it more and more. Do you see that as a door that could be open to all of us in the Churchill world to really lift up that keen interest that Churchill had in science? Elisebeth, I'll start with you.
Well, yes, absolutely. I think you're right on there. And it was kind of interesting yesterday in Alan Packwood's presentation to learn about the teachers' packs he has. I haven't had a chance to look those up yet. Certainly coming from Churchill College, I would expect there is quite a bit about Churchill's fascination with technology and the importance of science. Also something that we maybe don't think about that much is social engineering, because that was really a masterful part of the reason he was so successful, mobilizing whole populations to achieve success. So I really think there is a role for that. Yes, thank you.
Gary, you were speaking emphatically about climate change and science. Do you see that as something we all can be lifting up even more than we do?
Definitely the knowledge that science, and it's interesting, in the last 10 years, I understand many of the Commonwealth nations have adopted the idea, have alongside the Prime Minister's Department as a science advisor. So that is one step, and it's one step that got us, you know, through this COVID-19 without such upheaval in our society. Basically, we've gone on as we have as normal, and that's all due to the fact that the Prime Minister did accept the science advisor right at the beginning to say, this is what the science is saying. We've got to lock down and that happened. So we are a good example to say that science does work, with particularly at the moment of the pandemic world that's going on. And on the basis of an economist, you may say that I looked at it to say, well, what's more important, your life or unemployment? You know, well, you're not going to be unemployed if you're dead. So I think the fact is quite logical that we do need to. I think the rapid advancement of science is something where today I picked up a grandchild bag and I thought, wow, that's heavy. And of course I look inside and he's got an iPad, you know, and I'm thinking, oh, right, okay, that's fair enough, you know, and he's, oh, Toby's 7. So I think they're there already in terms of that technology. And as we all know, I hand the remote to the youngsters when I want something properly done to sort this out. Even looking at you today, that was done by a 10-year-old in setting up my Zoom. So yeah, I'm an optimist. And as I said, the science is coming to the fore, and we are really proactive in regards to getting science and putting across the idea that people must take science subjects. You know, there's been this big decline. Everyone wanted to be lawyers, maybe doctors. There is a science element, but science itself and pure science is something that is coming through, and engineering. And it's great to see it from the perspective of the gender balance now that tends to be now put in place, where students are accepted. It's a sort of 1-to-1 ratio, no equality there. So again, yeah, I smile. That's the way to be in this life. Thank you again for the opportunity.
And Robert, you touched upon it in your remarks. Would you like to comment on science as an important topic of study for Churchillians?
Well, it certainly is. And I mean, the example is there. As we've all agreed, he was very interested in science, and he demonstrated the scientific curiosity at a pretty young age, too. We're enjoying the spectacle now in Alberta of watching a provincial premier or political leader attempting to interpret scientific advice in a way that is politically palatable. The result is that he has probably either overdone it with measures or underdone it with measures at various times, and depending who you talk to, and now he's getting it from both sides. And I would think he's in an almost untenable position. It's getting really close to that. And we have some of our provincial representatives telling people about counseling their constituents on the topic of observing restrictions. Do your own research. So what does that tell you about respect for science? Like, the research is done. Doing your own research means, go to whatever echo chamber you want to get the information in from that you want to hear. So I'm not exactly sure how to go about doing that. I wasn't very strong in the STEM subjects myself. So it's a little bit difficult for me, but I think I have enough sense of who I am to be able to respect the judgments of the people who know about science. And this is where we're falling down. We're not, apparently a lot of people, even my age, have not learned that they don't know more than the epidemiologists do. They just don't, but they think they do. So again, it's just education. We have to show them how science works for us. Maybe we'll be able to go back and say, look what happened in this pandemic. At the beginning, we were saying it was going to be, 18 months to 2 years before we saw a workable vaccine. Well, it was less than 12 months, and vaccines were being fielded. Look at what happened, and look at how, and I'm hoping we'll be able to say, look at how effectively it dealt with the pandemic. Now, come on, you've got to believe in science. That can be parlayed into a very positive argument, should it work that way. Let's hope it does. I was just disturbed to read in the local paper this morning that the vaccine I got, or apparently in the UK, they're not sure it's that effective against variants of concern. I might have to go back to hiding in my basement.
My, you know, on this topic, maybe we'll let Churchill have the last word. As I think many of you know, we recently celebrated here at America's National Churchill Museum the 75th anniversary of the Iron Curtain speech, which is best known for its geopolitical roadmap for the Cold War and looming threat of Soviet expansion. However, Churchill mentioned science quite clearly, and it's almost sometimes a toss-away line, but I think it's in the speech, the Iron Curtain speech, when Churchill talks about the two great threats, the global threats of war and tyranny. Those are well known. But he also says quite clearly that he, and I quote, "I have not yet spoken of poverty and privation, which are in many cases the prevailing anxiety." Poverty and privation he talks about. But he says that the dangers of war and tyranny are removed. There is no doubt that science, and he says quite clearly that science and the cooperation alliances can bring the next world and the next decades to come an expansion of material well-being that has not yet occurred. So again, it's that optimism that Churchill talks about. And then he quotes an American, Burt Cochran. He says, "There is enough for all." This is Churchill quoting Cochran in the Iron Curtain speech. "The earth is a generous mother. She will provide in plentiful abundance food for all of her children if they cultivate her soil in justice and in peace." So I think for Churchill, again, even in the Iron Curtain speech, this idea of science and global entity defeating larger problems and threats of privation and poverty were front of mind, and it's something for all of us to lift up and look for and be informed and inspired with his leadership. We do have some questions that have come in from some of our viewers in chat, and I don't want to ignore them at all. And one talks a little bit about this is from about the Atlantic Charter and freedom. It's not right on topic with what we're talking about, but certainly the idea of education, of freedom, of alliances that were coming out. I know we have an anniversary of the Atlantic Charter coming up. Does anyone wish to talk a little bit about the importance of the Atlantic Charter and education and history and learning, perhaps, and being inspired from that moment of what we're facing today? Nope.
Don't know very much about
You're gonna
the
pass on that
Atlantic
one. I will recommend, however, a really new good book by Richard Evans, a scholar, a British gentleman who spends much time in Florida. He's just written a new book on the topic. And my plug for those who are interested in that book or in that topic, please look at that. We also have a question that came up about again, your part of the world, Ashadhu, and Uganda, and maybe we can bring you into the fold, particularly when it comes to climate change in Uganda, and to know how East Africa is impacted by this global threat. Maybe you can speak and share with us a little bit about what's happening in your part of the world as far as climate change and what's being done in the Pearl of Africa, as Churchill called it.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to actually we have a tourism symposium at Kenyatta University in Nairobi, and we are trying, one of the main objectives in that symposium is about addressing climate change actions. So Yes, as I said earlier, that all of us, we must find our voice on climate change. So yeah, we are trying as a Churchill institution to address that issue by organizing dialogues and symposiums, conferences, seminars within East Africa to try to address that issue. So yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And thank you again, Ashadhu, for all of the work that you have done and your colleagues to bring us together and raise these important questions that I think will are very Churchillian in nature, to ask the big questions and to then strive to bring people together, to have a summit, if you will, like we are now, to talk about them. I do encourage our audience, we have time for a couple of more questions, and then I think we'll take a short break before we welcome our next speaker, who is going to be Vice Admiral Michael Franken to the thing. But if there are any other questions, now's the time to ask them before we take a short break. I realize that we all suffer from Zoom fatigue from time to time, and sitting behind a screen for a long time needs to be, we need the break.
Tim, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
From a science perspective, after recently hosting a Churchill dinner where we replicated what he ate and consumed, be a man lives on his stomach, as we're told, be that he had cream pumpkin soup, big chicken pie, followed up with lots of vanilla and strawberry ice cream, all drunk down with lots of Moselle or Riesling wines, and then followed by Stilton cheese and a good brandy and Paul champagne, all thrown in. If someone's ever done a sort of chemical analysis of all the food intake to see if that may be some reason why his stamina was up there, to be able to, when you look, is just the writing and the hours that he used to keep, might be one way logically, not tongue in cheek, but those are aspects, in terms of how much maybe our nutritional fortitude might be something that keeps that stamina going for someone to spend the factor. I put that as a point of interest.
I think that might be a science project for which you might have a lot of test subjects volunteer.
Yes.
I do.
Well, none of our colleagues at the dinner could actually keep the pace, to be honest, and follow the same consumption number. And there was a good colleague friend of mine, a man who I like to acknowledge, called Lovett Edwards, who was a BBC correspondent for the Balkan region and who was involved in World War II and the SOE. He was my mentor at the time after the, anyway, so there's my acknowledgement to my good friend Lovett Edwards, who had that lunch with Churchill at one point.
Elisebeth, did you have I thought I saw your hand go up. Did you have something that you wanted to add?
Oh, well, he also took frequent naps. I don't know if that helped with his stamina. I know after a Christmas dinner myself, a nap is very welcome. It gives me a little bit more energy to meet the day. So I think napping was a key to Churchill's stamina. Also, I don't believe he was typically an early riser. I think he did work all hours of the day as required, but he didn't always start at the crack of dawn, that's for sure.
Agreed, and I'm a proponent of that. I don't make enough time for a nap myself. Perhaps we should all learn from Churchill. Before we take a short break here, is there anything else that we missed from your presentations that you'd like to lift up, or other questions? Anything happening in New Zealand or Canada that we should know about?
Well, in our part of the world, we're very concerned about our economy. We have had a lot of support required to help our businesses and individuals manage throughout this upset in our way of living. It revealed great inequalities and disparities in the amount and ways that people suffered, and the government did have to come into things in a fairly big way with financial support. In our particular region, we are still trying to get enough vaccines into people. We have work camps up in the north that are suffering very badly. So that's going on in our world. And as Bob was saying, it seems like our political leadership is lacking right now. So that's not helping us. That's going on here. And we are bearing up as well as we can with with Churchillian ideals. We know that things have been worse in the past, and they will get better. So there we are.
And it's spring.
Yes, it's spring here.
Finally.
Well, from spring in Canada to a different season altogether in New Zealand, Gary, I thank you for joining us. And this is truly a global conversation, and I appreciate, especially Gary. I know that it's I think by now I'm past 1 o'clock in the morning your time, so we do appreciate you're living Churchillian hours and just by being with us, and we do appreciate that. And it's early for you and Elisebeth and Robert. We do appreciate everyone joining us today. As I mentioned, we will take a short break now and be back, I believe, at 20 past the hour, wherever you may be, where we will be rejoined by Admiral Franken, who will offer the keynote speech for today's session. Once again, I'm Tim Riley from America's National Churchill Museum. On behalf of all of us here in Fulton, Missouri at Westminster College, and our great colleagues at the Churchill Institution in East Africa, Ashadhu and the team there, thank you once again for joining us. We'll keep this link, I believe, open for everyone, but we'll take a short break and be back with Admiral Franken, as I say, at 20 past the hour. Once again, thank you.